January 29th, 1944. Anzio beachhead, Italy. Staff Sergeant Jack Miller crouches in a drainage ditch 40 yards from a German machine gun nest, watching two enemy sentries change positions. The moon is 3/4 full. Too much light. The sentries move with practiced efficiency. No conversation, no wasted motion. Professional soldiers who've survived months of combat by staying alert. Miller counts their pattern. 12 seconds for the exchange, 8 seconds vulnerable while one sentry walks back to the bunker entrance. 8 seconds isn't enough time, not with the equipment he's carrying. Miller looks down at his feet. Standard issue U.S. Army combat boots, leather uppers with composition rubber soles. Regulation, durable. And utterly useless for what he's about to attempt. Every step sounds like crushing gravel in the frozen Italian mud. He learned that the hard way 3 nights ago when a German patrol heard him moving 60 yards away and nearly killed his entire reconnaissance team. He pulls a captured German jackboot from his pack, Marschstiefel, the Wehrmacht calls them. Hobnailed leather soles designed for road marching, not stealth. But Miller noticed something during yesterday's observation. German sentries don't react to the sound of hobnails on frozen ground. They hear it constantly. Their own patrols wear these boots. The sound is part of the acoustic landscape of their defensive positions. American boots sound different, softer, quieter, to American ears perhaps, but distinct enough that German sentries notice. Miller has 12 German positions to infiltrate tonight. Intelligence needs defensive layouts, weapon placements, communication wire routes, and minefield patterns before the breakout offensive in 48 hours. Standard reconnaissance doctrine says this mission requires a 6-man team working over 3 nights. Miller is going alone, and he's about to bet his life on enemy footwear. By late January 1944, Operation Shingle, the Allied amphibious landing at Anzio, had become a strategic stalemate that threatened to turn into another Gallipoli. The landing on January 22nd achieved complete tactical surprise. Sixth Corps, commanded by Major General John Lucas, put 36,000 troops and 3,200 vehicles ashore with minimal casualties. The road to Rome lay open, defended by scattered German units that military analysts believed could be swept aside within 48 hours. But General Lucas hesitated. Instead of exploiting the surprise, he ordered his forces to consolidate the beachhead and await reinforcements. The decision gave German Field Marshal Albert Kesselring exactly what he needed: time. Within 72 hours, Kesselring assembled 40,000 troops around the Allied perimeter. Within a week, he had 70,000. The beachhead that was supposed to unhinge the entire Gustav Line became a death trap. The Allied position measured roughly 16 miles wide and 7 miles deep, a shallow pocket pressed against the Tyrrhenian Sea, with German artillery commanding every approach. The terrain favored the defenders. Flat coastal plain transitioned to broken ground with drainage ditches, irrigation canals, and scattered farm buildings providing perfect defensive positions. German forces occupied the Alban Hills to the northeast, giving them observation over the entire beachhead. Fifth Army intelligence estimated German forces had established 200-plus fortified positions in a 3-mile arc around the Allied perimeter. Each position housed between 8 and 40 soldiers with interlocking fields of fire covering every avenue of approach. Minefields, barbed wire, and pre-registered artillery made frontal assaults suicidal. Allied casualties in the first week: 5,500 killed, wounded, or missing. What made the tactical situation particularly desperate was the intelligence deficit. Standard reconnaissance patrols couldn't penetrate German defenses without triggering firefights that alerted the enemy and accomplished nothing. Sixth Corps desperately needed detailed information about German positions, weapon types, crew sizes, bunker construction, communication networks, and supply routes. before launching the breakout offensive planned for early February. The Rangers had been attempting this mission using conventional tactics, small teams moving at night, observing from a distance, withdrawing before dawn. Results were inadequate. Long-range observation couldn't determine whether a position held 5 soldiers or 50. It couldn't identify whether a bunker was reinforced concrete or simple earthworks. It couldn't locate buried communication wires or trace supply routes through the German rear areas. Colonel William Darby, commanding the Ranger Force at Anzio, needed close-range intelligence. That meant putting scouts within 20 yards of enemy positions, close enough to hear conversations, count personnel, observe routines, and identify vulnerabilities. But every attempt had failed. German sentries detected American patrols through sound signatures alone. The problem wasn't just footsteps. American equipment rattled differently than German equipment. American mess kits, canteens, and ammunition pouches created distinct acoustic profiles. German sentries learned to identify Allied soldiers by sound long before visual contact. Veterans of the Eastern Front had spent 2 years listening to Soviet infiltrators. They knew every trick. Staff Sergeant Jack Miller of the 1st Ranger Battalion had served at Anzio since the landing. A former hunting guide from Montana, Miller understood that successful infiltration required matching the enemy's acoustic and visual profile. He studied German patrol patterns, noted their equipment signatures, and realized that Allied forces were trying to be quiet when they should have been trying to sound German. The idea seemed absurd to conventional military thinking. Wearing enemy equipment violated basic doctrine and risked being shot by American forces. But Miller had observed something crucial during nighttime reconnaissance. German sentries didn't investigate sounds that matched their expectations. They investigated anomalies. An American trying to move silently created anomalies. Soft rubber soles on frozen ground, unfamiliar equipment rattles, movement patterns that didn't match German tactical procedures. Miller proposed a different approach. Don't hide from German senses. Deceive them instead. His battalion commander authorized one trial run, 12 positions, one night. If Miller survived, the Rangers would adopt his methods. If he didn't, the idea died with him. German defensive doctrine at Anzio reflected lessons learned from 2 years of Eastern Front warfare, where Soviet infiltration tactics had killed thousands of Wehrmacht soldiers. Oberst Eberhard von Mackensen, commanding German forces in the sector facing the Rangers, had fought at Stalingrad. He knew what happened when sentries grew complacent. His standing orders were explicit: investigate every anomaly, challenge every sound, assume infiltrators are present. German positions operated under constant alert with overlapping sentry patterns and random patrol schedules designed to catch infiltrators off guard. The Germans weren't overconfident. They were meticulous. After-action reports from captured Allied scouts revealed the effectiveness of German acoustic surveillance. One Ranger patrol leader wrote, "We moved with extreme caution, placing each step carefully, maintaining noise discipline that would satisfy any training instructor. The Germans opened fire before we closed to within 80 yards. They never saw us. They heard something that didn't belong." Allied intelligence officers studying the problem concluded that close-range reconnaissance against prepared German positions was effectively impossible without suffering prohibitive casualties. The mathematical reality was brutal. To gather intelligence on 12 positions, conventional doctrine suggested 6 to 8 reconnaissance teams operating over multiple nights. Expected casualties, 40–60%. Expected intelligence quality, marginal, because teams observing from 100+ yards couldn't gather the detailed information commanders needed. What frustrated American commanders was that German patrols routinely moved through Allied positions undetected. Wehrmacht scouts seemed capable of infiltrating anywhere, gathering intelligence, and withdrawing without Allied sentries noticing. The asymmetry suggested German soldiers possessed superior fieldcraft, an assumption that damaged American morale. The reality was more subtle. German scouts weren't better. They were different. They moved with confidence rather than excessive caution. They wore equipment that Allied sentries expected to hear. They followed movement patterns consistent with Allied patrol doctrine. When American sentries heard sounds matching their expectations, soldiers, walking with familiar equipment signatures, they didn't investigate. Anomalies triggered responses. Expected sounds did not. Miller understood this from hunting elk in Montana wilderness. Elk hunters who tried to move silently through forest undergrowth failed because their careful movements created unnatural sound patterns that alerted game. Successful hunters moved naturally, matching the rhythm and acoustic signature of the forest itself. The same principle applied to infiltrating enemy positions. But convincing military leadership to adopt this approach was difficult. The idea of wearing enemy equipment seemed desperate, possibly suicidal. Friendly forces might shoot infiltrators wearing German boots. International law regarding combatants in enemy uniforms was murky, and if captured, German forces might execute soldiers wearing Wehrmacht equipment as spies rather than treating them as prisoners of war. Miller's battalion commander, Major Roy Murray, authorized the mission with explicit understanding of the risks. Murray's written orders stated, Sergeant Miller is authorized to utilize captured enemy equipment for reconnaissance purposes. All responsibility for this tactical innovation rests with the undersigned. It was a calculated risk based on desperate need. The breakout offensive couldn't succeed without detailed intelligence. Conventional methods had failed. Either Miller's approach worked, or Ranger Force would assault German positions blind. The Germans, watching American perimeter with night vision optics and alert sentries, had no idea what was coming. Before we continue, I'd love to know where you're watching from and what you know about unconventional infiltration tactics in World War II. Drop a comment below and let me know if you'd heard about Rangers using captured German equipment for reconnaissance missions before. And if you're enjoying these deep dives into the forgotten stories of special operations in Italy, hit that subscribe button. These stories take serious research. Tracking down after-action reports, battalion war diaries, and veteran testimonies that never made it into mainstream histories, and knowing you're out there makes it all worthwhile. Miller begins preparation at 2100 hours, 3 hours before infiltration begins. He strips his uniform of every piece of American equipment. Dog tags go into a sealed envelope left with Major Murray. If Miller is killed wearing German boots, his body needs proper identification. His M1 Garand rifle stays behind. The weapon's 8-round en-bloc clip makes a distinctive metallic ping when empty, instantly recognizable to German ears. Instead, Miller carries a captured Carabiner 98K, the standard German infantry rifle. The weapon feels different, balances differently, but sounds correct. He replaces his canvas cartridge belt with a German leather Y-strap system. His American canteen, aluminum with a distinctive rattle, is swapped for a German M31 Feldflasche, enameled steel that makes no sound when carried properly. His trench knife goes into a German belt frog. Even his first aid kit is replaced with a captured German Verbenkasten. The boots are the critical element. Miller selected them carefully from captured equipment stores. Size 43, approximately American size 10, worn but serviceable. The hobnails are intact, small metal cleats hammered into the leather sole in a distinctive Wehrmacht pattern. These boots weren't designed for stealth. They were designed for 20-mile road marches across European highways. The hobnails provide traction and durability, but create unmistakable sounds on hard surfaces. That's exactly what Miller wants. At 23:45 hours, Miller crosses the American perimeter at a designated infiltration point. 2 Ranger sentries watch him go, knowing they might never see him return. The temperature is 38 degrees Fahrenheit, cold enough to freeze the mud into irregular ridges that amplify every footstep. Miller moves toward the first German position 800 yards northwest of the American lines. Intelligence reports indicate a reinforced squad, 12 to 15 soldiers, occupying a fortified farmhouse with machine gun positions covering the approach road. Miller's mission: determine exact troop strength, weapon types, ammunition, storage locations, and whether the position has telephone or radio communication. He doesn't crawl, he walks. The hobnailed boots crunch on frozen ground with each step. To Miller's ears, the sound is alarming, loud, distinct, impossible to miss. Every instinct screams at him to move more carefully, place each foot with precision, minimize noise. He forces himself to walk normally, matching the rhythm and cadence of German patrols he's observed over the past week. At 400 yards from the German position, Miller estimates he's within earshot of alert sentries. He continues walking. The hobnails click and scrape on frozen mud. He's making more noise than any American reconnaissance patrol would dare make. No reaction from the German position. At 200 yards, Miller can see the farmhouse silhouette against the night sky. Moonlight illuminates the approach well enough that sentries should spot movement. He keeps walking, angling his approach to pass 60 yards north of the main position, close enough to observe, far enough to seem like a patrol route rather than a direct approach. A voice calls out from the darkness. German. "Wer da?" Miller freezes. The challenge wasn't aggressive, more curious than alarmed. A sentry asking who's there, expecting a routine answer from a German patrol. Miller has prepared for this moment. He doesn't speak German well enough to answer convincingly, but he understands the doctrine. German patrols often don't answer challenges immediately if they're on a classified mission. Miller remains motionless for 3 seconds, then deliberately steps forward twice. 2 loud, confident steps. That say I'm supposed to be here without words. The hobnails announce each step clearly. 10 seconds pass. No follow-up challenge. No shots. The sentry heard boots he recognized and movement suggesting purpose. The assumption? Another German patrol checking the perimeter. Miller continues past the position, now 40 yards from the farmhouse. Through the darkness, he observes details invisible from 100 yards. The machine gun nest is a Maschinengewehr 42, not the older MG34. Important because the MG42 fires 1,200 rounds per minute compared to the MG34's 900. He counts 6 soldiers visible outside the farmhouse, suggesting total garrison of 1215 as reported. He spots buried communication wire leading northeast toward German command positions. He notes ammunition crates stacked near the entrance, enough for sustained defense. He catalogs everything in memory, knowing he can't stop to take notes. Stopping would break the illusion. German patrols move with purpose. They don't loiter in enemy observation range. Miller passes the position and continues northwest for 200 yards before circling back toward the second target. The infiltration has worked. He's walked within 40 yards of a German strongpoint, observed details no long-range reconnaissance could obtain, and the enemy assumed he belonged there. Over the next 6 hours, Miller infiltrates 11 more positions using the same technique. Each approach refines his method. He learns that German sentries are most alert between 0200 and 0400 hours, the traditional infiltration window when they expect enemy scouts. Miller schedules his infiltrations during evening hours and just before dawn, when German soldiers are changing guard shifts and expect internal movement. Position 7 nearly ends the mission. Miller approaches too directly, and a sentry challenges him at 30 yards. This time, the German's tone is suspicious. Miller responds by coughing, a rough, phlegmy sound, and turning as if walking toward a latrine. The sentry laughs and says something Miller doesn't understand, but the meaning is clear: sympathy for a soldier with a bad cold needing the toilet. Miller disappears into the darkness while the sentry returns to his post. Position 12, the final target, is a German artillery observation post on elevated ground with clear views across the Allied beachhead. Miller approaches from the rear, the one direction German observers rarely watch because they assume their own lines are secure. He spends 15 minutes lying 25 yards behind the position, listening to German forward observers call artillery corrections over telephone lines. He memorizes their communication procedures, identifies their call signs, and notes exactly how many seconds delay occurs between observation and artillery impact. The intelligence is invaluable. American forces can predict artillery strikes by monitoring German observer communications and take cover during the delay window. Miller returns to American lines at 0615 hours, just before sunrise. He's been in German-controlled territory for 7 hours, infiltrated 12 positions, and gathered intelligence that would have required 40 soldiers using conventional methods. Casualties: 0. Miller's debriefing with Ranger Force intelligence officers begins immediately and lasts 4 hours. The tactical intelligence is extraordinary. Miller provides detailed sketches of each position from memory, identifying weapon types, crew sizes, fields of fire, and vulnerability points. He reports that German positions are heavily defended from frontal approaches, but minimally protected from rear areas. The Wehrmacht assumes their own territory is secure. He identifies communication wire routes that Allied artillery can sever, isolating German strongpoints from higher command. Most critically, Miller reveals that German defensive positions operate on predictable schedules. Guard changes occur at 0600, 1400, and 2200 hours. Ammunition resupply runs follow the same routes at the same times. Forward observers call situation reports to artillery command every 90 minutes. These patterns create exploitation windows that American forces can target. But the technique itself, the acoustic deception using enemy equipment, interests intelligence officers more than the tactical details. Colonel Darby personally interviews Miller about the methodology, recognizing that this approach could revolutionize special operations infiltration. The analysis reveals why the deception worked. Human perception relies on pattern recognition. German sentries unconsciously categorize sounds into familiar safe or unfamiliar threat. Hobnailed boots on frozen ground registered as familiar because German patrols created that sound constantly. The acoustic signature matched expectations, so sentries ignored it. American rubber-soled boots, even when moving carefully, created unfamiliar sound patterns that triggered investigation. The technique worked because it exploited psychology rather than attempting to defeat sensory capability. Previous Allied reconnaissance doctrine assumed sentries would detect any noise, so patrols tried to minimize sound. Miller's approach accepted that sentries would hear him and instead ensured they heard sounds that didn't alarm them. Ranger Force immediately implements the methodology across reconnaissance elements. Within 3 days, 20 Rangers are conducting infiltration missions using captured German boots and equipment. The intelligence collected transforms Allied understanding of German defensive positions. Previously unknown weapon emplacements, minefield layouts, and patrol routes become documented facts. German forces notice the increased Allied reconnaissance activity, but don't understand how American scouts are penetrating their defenses. Wehrmacht after-action reports from early February 1944 reference unexplained security breaches and possible collaborator activity. German commanders suspected Italian civilians were providing intelligence to Allied forces. They never considered that American soldiers were walking through their positions wearing German boots. The technique's effectiveness had limits. It worked at night when visual identification was difficult and acoustic signatures dominated sentry awareness. Daylight infiltration remained impossible. The method required soldiers with exceptional fieldcraft and nerve, walking confidently toward enemy positions, while every instinct screamed to hide required psychological discipline most soldiers didn't possess. Miller's success also depended on thorough preparation. He studied German patrol patterns for weeks before attempting infiltration. He understood typical German challenge and response protocols. He knew which sounds German soldiers expected and which would alarm them. Soldiers attempting this technique without adequate preparation faced capture or death. Allied intelligence officers documented the methodology in classified tactical bulletins distributed to special operations units throughout the Mediterranean theater. The British Special Air Service adopted similar techniques, using captured German equipment for reconnaissance missions in Yugoslavia and Greece. The Office of Strategic Services, precursor to the CIA, studied Miller's approach for agent insertion operations behind enemy lines. The technique never became standard doctrine because it required exceptional individual skill and carried significant risks. Soldiers captured in enemy uniforms faced execution as spies under the Geneva Convention's ambiguous language regarding lawful combatants. But for elite reconnaissance units operating in desperate circumstances, Miller's innovation provided a capability that conventional methods couldn't match. At Anzio, that capability helped break the stalemate. The intelligence gathered through infiltration missions enabled Allied forces to identify weak points in German defenses and plan the February breakout offensive with accurate tactical understanding. The Allied breakout from Anzio began on May 23, 1944, 4 months after Miller's initial infiltration mission. The delay wasn't due to intelligence failures. It was due to strategic disagreements about whether to break out toward Rome or cut German retreat routes from the Gustav Line. When the offensive finally launched, Allied forces benefited from 4 months of detailed reconnaissance that documented German defensive positions with unprecedented accuracy. Rangers leading the assault knew exactly which positions held heavy weapons, which were lightly defended, and which could be bypassed entirely. Artillery strikes targeted communication nodes identified during infiltration missions, isolating German strongpoints. Engineers knew minefield layouts and cleared safe corridors before infantry advanced. The tactical advantages provided by close-range reconnaissance reduced Allied casualties significantly compared to earlier assaults against prepared German positions. Staff Sergeant Jack Miller survived Anzio and continued serving with Ranger Force through the Italian campaign. He received the Silver Star for gallantry in action during reconnaissance operations. The citation couldn't specify details because infiltration techniques remained classified. Miller was promoted to technical sergeant and trained other Rangers in acoustic deception methods before rotating back to the United States in October 1944. After the war, Miller returned to Montana and resumed work as a hunting guide. He rarely discussed his military service, and the specifics of his infiltration techniques remained classified until the 1970s when declassified Ranger Force war diaries revealed the extent of unconventional reconnaissance operations at Anzio. The methodology Miller pioneered influenced post-war special operations doctrine. U.S. Army Special Forces incorporated acoustic deception into survival, evasion, resistance, and escape training. The principle, match enemy expectations rather than attempting perfect concealment, became foundational to infiltration tactics taught at modern special operations schools. Military historians analyzing Anzio see the intelligence gathered through infiltration missions as a critical factor in the eventual Allied victory. Professor Rick Atkinson, writing in The Day of Battle, notes that reconnaissance elements at Anzio demonstrated that tactical ingenuity could overcome defensive superiority when conventional methods failed. The specific techniques remained classified in Atkinson's account, but the results were undeniable. Allied forces achieved tactical surprise during the May breakout despite German expectations of the offensive. What's remarkable is how simple the innovation was. Miller didn't invent new technology or develop complex tactical procedures. He observed enemy behavior, understood their perceptual patterns, and exploited the gap between what they heard and what they investigated. The solution cost nothing. Captured boots were plentiful and required no special authorization or equipment modifications. The broader lesson extended beyond military applications. Intelligence officers studying Miller's success recognized that security systems optimized to detect anomalies, creating vulnerability to threats that match expected patterns. This insight influenced Cold War espionage doctrine, where agents learned to blend into expected behaviors rather than hiding from observation. Today, Miller's infiltration missions are studied at the U.S. Army Ranger School as examples of adaptive problem-solving under combat conditions. The specific details, walking openly toward enemy positions while wearing captured boots, seem almost absurdly simple. But simplicity doesn't diminish effectiveness. Sometimes, the most sophisticated solution is recognizing that the enemy's senses aren't the problem. Their assumptions are. Every security system contains the seeds of its own defeat because security requires assumptions about threats. German defenses at Anzio were sophisticated, well-manned, and professionally operated. They weren't defeated by superior firepower or overwhelming numbers. They were defeated by a soldier who recognized that perfection isn't necessary. Matching expectations is sufficient. The Germans expected infiltrators to hide. Miller walked openly and let them hear exactly what they expected to hear. The innovation required understanding a fundamental truth about human perception. We don't process everything we see and hear. We filter information through expectations, dismissing data that matches our assumptions and investigating anomalies. This cognitive shortcut enables humans to function in complex environments without sensory overload. It also creates exploitable vulnerabilities. Miller succeeded because he stopped trying to be invisible and instead became expected. He didn't defeat German senses. He deceived German assumptions. The distinction matters because it reveals that the strongest defenses often protect against the wrong threats. 1 Ranger, 12 positions, 7 hours of infiltration that provided intelligence conventional methods couldn't obtain. The mission worked because Miller understood that German sentries weren't listening for any sound. They were listening for wrong sounds. Hobnailed boots on frozen ground weren't wrong. They were German. Sometimes the best disguise isn't silence. It's making the noise the enemy expects to hear. And sometimes, courage isn't about what you do. It's about what you stop trying to hide. If you found this story as fascinating as I did researching it, tracking down declassified Ranger Force war diaries and tactical bulletins that documented these infiltration techniques, I'd appreciate if you'd like this video and subscribe to the channel. There are dozens more untold stories from World War II special operations that deserve to be remembered. The unconventional tactics, the individual innovations, the moments when one soldier's insight changed entire campaigns. I'll be bringing you a new story every week. What should I cover next? The Devil's Brigade at Monte la Defensa, the Alamo Scouts in the Pacific, or OSS operations behind German lines in France? Let me know in the comments below.